7, 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2. Check, 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 check.
Therefore, and whenever you get in touch with them, if they tell you something like that,
Can you keep going because I want to make sure.
Keep talking down. I have to go get it.
All right, thanks, Luke. First line.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds clean.
copy that.
So, okay, it's apparently then it's channel 3. That you're on right now.
-1. I got that. I was just wasn't sure
Yeah,
what
so now
they
that's
meant
over
by
here, but
in the work order, but I got.
stream is still the same.
When you need your help, of course. Thank you.
No, they have no. That's the thing. There's no audio running into them, and also I don't have a memory card for it right now. But what you do have is yeah. So like I said, just before we start, you would just press this, and then it'll start recording. You're streaming right now. I mean, put it to you this way: you'll still have the archive of the stream, but if there's anything wrong with the stream, that translates to the recording. So. Yeah, that should be fine. And then, I'll grab it off of here later on and edit. And that's pretty much it. Your audio levels should be fine. Your stream is a bit higher than, what is it? Yeah, I was gonna say, but what's gonna end up happening is you're gonna hear it.
You guys are going to record this event?
Yep.
Okay.
And live stream.
Well, I got the
Can I screen it?
Okay, you got that? Yeah.
I got the headphones.
Okay. So what I would do then is so that way you're not walking in front of them. That's the only thing that kind of sucks that I had to set it up over here. Is that
That'd be hilarious.
yeah.
I'm sitting like this for the whole thing.
That's right. As they see you the entire time you're down there.
Down in front.
That's right. So you got that, and then that is your, I mean, the honest truth of this stuff. Hold on.
Ask you one favor for your health. Can you talk on the
Sure, well, okay, you know what I'm gonna do? Check 1, 2, testing 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a test of the microphone, okay?
Check, check, check. Check, check, check. All right, you got that? I can see it from there. Sorry, did I just?
No.
Oh.
These headphones, like, I feel like I'm in that scene from Casino where they got the guy's head in the vice. Things are like splitting my head.
Yeah. That's the additional thing. This mic tends to be a little lower than all of them. Yeah. The wireless comes in better. Yeah. Check, check. You hear me? Yeah, yeah. Check, 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 check. 2. Check, 2, 2.
It's weird that the wireless is better than the wire.
Yeah, it comes in, for some reason, it just comes, the clarity of it comes in stronger.
I would think it'd be the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess when you have the sensitivity, you can adjust it.
Yeah, right.
So. See. Hopefully they'll know where to sit. I think this is more of a student.
was three of us.
It's you, me, Cheryl.
Who?
Me, Cheryl Frank.
Oh, okay. Four.
and Sylvia and Cheryl.
We don't have it.
So you're the moderator?
No, I'm not the moderator. You look like a moderator. Thank you. Good to see you. I don't know.
Well,
Oh,
there is,
that's okay.
there is a computer. I think there is a screen.
Did you want the screen?
Yes, please. Can you, are you,
Yeah.
thank you so much. What do you mean without PowerPoint? I mean,
I have 2.5 points to make.
Are you gonna put up a picture? Yes, I'm sorry.
I really think that I can hold in my brain what I need to.
No, I jotted down some notes.
You see, we all have our mnemonic devices.
Yeah.
Worst places. So,
It's unfortunate that one of the highest justices in the land can be so topical to do something like this, right? People doesn't even be able to attend those meetings.
start with this.
That committee the wrong way. And then I know we were supposed to be having a meeting together with him, the president.
Could you speak into that microphone?
I'll probably be at some point where very
I will probably stand by the computer for my time, so.
Don't worry about it. It's okay.
So I incorporated some of what we spoke
Mhm.
about.
Good, I have to speak even less then.
No, that's what I wanted to say, only by suggestion, right? So I'm going to,
How large do you think the audience is going to be?
The lighting?
I thought that nobody will come because I'm a pessimist, but now I went to the 10th floor and people are saying, are you going to the hate versus hateful versus? I'm like, good for you. I mean, how do you know that?
He's gonna be live, he is live streaming, so it's important talking to him.
No problem.
Let
Sure.
everyone know.
It's a Trump is watching.
I'm going to mention him.
You have to. He speaks to the heat. He speaks to the deeper anxiety that everybody's.
That's right.
Nobody feels safe. I said, oh, welcome to feel like to know what it's like being poor. Greetings. How are you? Good, good. Good, good. Good, good. Yes.
But I'm going to talk about something more disturbing, which is why we actually do not have a good counterpoint to Trump. So in my research on radicalization, I come from brain sciences. So in my research, if the brain is not disconfirmed,
Oh, okay.
then for us,
And then we
it
are,
means that it
we have
is
to push
true.
the button.
Whatever they
To
say.
Trump,
speak,
that's
right?
right. So that's what Trump does. He
Hello,
is
hello.
gliding
Okay, maybe.
on the half-truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then he can say something like, well, the reason it sounds sort of right, and with a little bit of fear, it sounds even more right, but because we don't have any alternative,
We
then
have to bring Ian Haney Lopez in here to talk about his book, Dog Whistle Politics. And I've asked them to bring him, and they haven't acquiesced yet to my request.
tell me more about that.
So Ian Haney Lopez's book, which is about a year old now, called Dog Whistle Politics, talks about how race becomes the pivotal point in election campaigns, and how inevitably, people who are on the wrong side of racial issues and are, plagued with all kinds of racial stereotypes and racial fear, then go with the candidate who feeds into
That's
those
right.
fears.
That's right. But the thing about Donald Trump that I found most, so I'm sitting on white supremacist groups and hate groups. That's, I guess I sinned in past lives. But what I find is that Donald Trump can always say, well, the reason you don't hear it from other people is that they are tethered to lobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
The
That's
Kennedys and the others are a bit more scope, but that's your point. They're nice in how they say, but they don't
It's good to see you. It's been a long time.
So we managed to maintain. So what happens is that most of Trump
If I move, it's
supporters
sometimes I don't
are
want to
really
sit next to
people
you.
like who are supporting ISIS in a sense that they are very sensitive to
Okay.
hypocrisy.
Cheryl Plank is
And he
missing. I'm like,
exposes
somebody's
hypocrisy and they say,
Cheryl's,
my
yeah,
God,
Cheryl's coming.
the people are
Yeah.
behaving
Last
this
time I
way,
sort of
this
started
guy
in
is
later
talking this
foundation
way.
and
So
then
who
it
are we,
sort of
if
progressed.
you are an
All
adolescent,
of those
you
encouragements
appreciate
about
more
respectful
honesty because
expression.
you are,
There's no subtlety.
there is no subtlety.
There's no
Yeah,
nuance.
That's
you
right.
know, so
So
I know you've been
anybody who
in
will,
the
so
whole Cook Brother
hypocrisy
thing.
is something that you
I'm
really
still
cannot
waiting
accept.
for my
And you
my
see
meeting
everything is
date.
hypocrisy.
Yes,
So
I
if your parents
yeah.
are,
It's
I
nihilism.
appreciate you
that's right.
raising that. It's
So,
a lot of
so this
sensitive
is,
issues.
I think what our real problem is.
Yeah, and and I'm just hoping that we
So
can
we have,
have
you know
a
obviously
principled
the background.
discussion of that.
That's
Not
Daniel
one that's
officer. She's
caught up in the
Oh,
nuts and
Daniel,
the bolts
yes,
and
of course.
just-
This
That's
is
a
how it
big
all
deal.
started.
I
I mean,
am
it
a
started
lawyer.
with
I
the
recognize a
conversation
lawyer
that
That's
I
a
had
VP.
with her.
So I want
It's
to
a
cut.
we cannot get
Yeah.
anything by
So
anybody.
I want to like cut
That's the head
past
of
that
She was like
and
3
let's
months
talk about
Linear.
how
Let's
to
not
be
get
a
lost in the
Limit
trees,
Francis.
right?
right.
You got-
So
you
let's
got-
talk about
remember
how
Cook?
we're
You
going
got
to,
Cook?
strengthen the
In my
community.
Yeah.
age, when I
And,
used a PowerPoint as a crutch for
Find out
everything,
if we
That's
have
the
some
director
ethical
of
standards
public safety.
about where we receive money
he's
from.
a kid.
Right,
And,
exactly.
you know,
What
and
the
if-
expectations
And I
are,
don't
and
know,
informing the
this looks
community
like a
about
student.
it
I
before
don't
they
know
find
this young
out
man is
some
who's
indirect
dressed
way.
for the ball.
I always
that's why I'm so happy
Oh
this
my
panel
God,
was
we-
coming,
we
you know,
are
so soon,
almost-
right? That,
So good to see you.
to avoid the contentious issues.
I was just
Only
thinking
makes
about
things
how it all started with
Yeah,
us.
to attack you
Like-
without just leaving the elephant in the room.
But an
Right.
announcement
Only
went
makes
out that the
things-
students
yes.
could not attend.
And I think, you know, Gary McCarthy, who, you know, I knew before he went to Chicago, because he's
Don't
the
answer.
chief in, well, the director of police in Newark.
Distraction.
Uh-huh.
Distraction.
Saw how it was
Distraction.
coming out. And even if he thought he was doing the right thing, which I can't imagine that you would think that, and it took, you know, 13 months before it all blew up in his face.
That's right.
At the end, he's no longer the chief in Chicago. And there were people who were saying he was doing some really progressive things. All of that gets blown up
Right.
because of his handling of this
Right.
one contentious
One
Well,
thing just mars
that-
every
Way.
positive thing
You
he
have
did.
not read Heraclitus
Yeah, no,
that
I
talks
suppose
about
I
the
saw
world
these
as a
something else,
river.
because
You
sometimes
never,
people don't-
even if you
don't
dip in
think
the
about
same
that.
place, you never dipped in the same river.
Transactions.
No. In November,
And
after the
there's
election,
this
we get
Exactly.
they'll all be
We-
weeping in front of our team. Like, oh, they told us we didn't listen. The river's gone.
to avoid a blow up later.
As they're lining up at the
No,
Canadian
absolutely.
border, you know.
Busy week, huh?
You know,
It's an
all in the
understatement.
open for years, the police was like
Looking
a
forward to
fortress
They
that
get to
bred
Friday
like us
tomorrow. I
versus
say it like
them.
it's next week.
And today they are. That's what I say to my friends. I want to come back
Yes.
in 300 years.
And they'll probably
If only to sit on the mountain and say, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so.
articulated. So that's both the conceptual framework and I talk about the
Interesting
model, how you
news
do
here.
it. So I think,
Somebody told
depending
the
on
staff
what they
they
say.
had to come.
But if I show
Somebody
that
told
one,
the
then
staff
I'll
they had to
just
come.
quickly run through the best
We
practice.
have more staff than
I see.
students.
I know.
And senior staff.
The two of them will, you know, presenting those will take like a long time. I don't want to up there.
No, I understand.
And
Yeah.
like the white one.
Oh, stop it.
We so much time.
I don't think, you know what, those views really don't need to, things don't need to be
I
packaged
want
that
to
way.
have it to be. I think that
Yeah, I could easily get up there
that's
and
right.
tap
And
her
what he
one
does
time and
is
they
very,
still be like, oh, she needs to.
almost like a policy when things happen.
Yeah, well, you're very sensitive to that, I mean,
I think it's actually a good
I
thing.
think you're sensitive
I think
to,
that if there are no female students. We
not
will
being condescending,
parse
but I
it
think we all are
equally,
sensitive to not
and we
being
will talk about
condescending
things,
towards abuse
and
situation.
then there will be a record of it.
I don't think you need to be held to a higher standard.
That's
That's unfair.
And we will do what the media is doing. We will take all the students in one corner, and we will make and zoom on
Yes.
them. It
Tight
will
time.
next it.
Tight time.
It
And
will
I think they
be
don't realize
as
that's
if
the
there
other
are
thing.
multitude of them. And then we can take footage from the commencement. What did you say? Homecoming. From the homecoming footage and clip it together with our footage, and we have a podcast, right?
ISIS. ISIS.
You can tell I've done research in terrorist propaganda all my life. Yeah.
Sort of blank heart to talk. Express their views and
Well, I
stuff.
might as well
The
throw in
300.
10 Commandments.
Good to see you. How are you?
It's 1:45.
How are you?
Good to see you.
45.
Hi, how are you? It's good to see you.
Hello, thank you.
So, how long do you think we should?
I mean, we should just have, I think, brief statements and then talk to
Fine.
each other.
Are you guys
Okay.
have decided amongst yourselves?
So we will have what? 5 to 7 minutes each. Great.
As soon as Cheryl comes back.
So I think we should start. We all
soon as-
bathe, so you can
Sure.
come
Oh,
closer.
we gotta wait for Cheryl.
Yeah, I'm
waiting
just
for
waiting for
Cheryl.
Cheryl to
Yeah,
come
yeah,
back.
of course.
Should we go in the same order as last time, or we just go down
She
like
remembers
this?
you.
I think that can be a good order. I mean, unless you let's see.
Well, last time what we did was
That's right,
I
last
did the
time
first
you
one
were-
because
that's
I did some
right.
sort of legal
That's right.
principles and sort of principles for public institutions type of thing, and then
So actually, it can work because if you will talk third, you can bring
Okay.
us back into the institution. Then we'll reopen it.
Okay.
I mean, it will be an.
okay.
It could.
So we're gonna get ready to start. On behalf of the Dean of Students, I just want to thank everybody for coming. It is being live streamed, so hopefully we will have some interaction from individuals out in the John Jay community. But again, this is the second time that we're doing this as a part of our community conversations. As we know, there are a lot of hot topics out there, and it's important to have this kind of dialogue on our college campus. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Shuki Cohen, who is going to moderate today's discussion. Thank you guys for all being here.
Thank you, Danielle. So I created a small slide to capture my thoughts and also a little bit of history of how it all started. It actually started with discussions I had with Miss Officer. At the time, there was a wave of hate communication in the college. And one of the things that came up is that we felt like there is a dichotomy or a divide or a chasm. There is either hate speech, but there is also some sort of an avoidance of a more hurtful, perhaps, but necessary speech. Later, as I will show you, I think that was, we were the first swallow that, signified the spring, because the whole country seemed to be then ripping at the seams of some of the same splitting process. So one thing is for sure, both hurtful and hateful speech are unpleasant, except that what I believe in, and I would like to hear the reactions of my esteemed colleagues, is that academia is about making people comfortable with the hurtful speech, because hurtful is still something that we can make into a constructive learning experience, unlike hateful speech, which is really destructive. Also, hurtful speech is self-control, in a sense that you can take a hurtful speech, meaning you can take a grievance that somebody is telling you and learn from it. It is up to you to learn from it. Eleanor Roosevelt also said that it is up to you if you get insulted or not. But the hateful speech seems to be other controlled, meaning when we feel the hate, many times we feel like the other has controlled us. And I think that in the service of empowering students and ourselves, we have to make that distinction. Also, and related to it, hurtful speech can be functional, while hateful speech is dysfunctional. So this comes derived from everything that I have shown you. Now, those of you who know me or know of my work know that there is no way to talk to me without getting somewhere into terrorism realm and radicalization. But also, if we are looking at this at splitting, one of the things that I want to do today or to suggest today is to go one step further from the idea of what constitutes a legally protected speech that could be hurtful and hateful speech, which is illegal and should not be tolerated on campus. I want to take it to the next step and say that we as academicians have the mandate and the ability to take that hurtful speech and actually examine it and increase in our students the ability to contain it, to make it into a practice. And the more we can tolerate hurtful speech, the more I believe, or that comes from my research, we will have less of the hateful speech. And this is how it goes. So my research shows that with our avoiding talking about hurtful stuff, talking about grievances, we are actually going into talking only to a sounding chamber of our own people. And in our zeal of perhaps becoming politically correct and not talking about problems, or becoming just avoidant and ignoring issues that we have, such as racial issues, such as disparities that we see. By avoiding it, we are only, at least my research shows, we are only supporting, in a way, this kind of fragmentization and people talking to themselves. In this day and age where 30% of people are in college age get most of their news from social media, meaning that they have rarefied their friends and they are getting information that basically concurs with their pre-existing notions, I think academia is exactly where we could perhaps avoid this process of avoiding the hurtful in the service of hateful, and actually empower our students to contain, to seek talking about hurtful stuff. And if we have this kind of dialogue, we could perhaps become more functional in our society at large. And I'm talking about any of the splitting that we see today of racial basis, ethnic basis. We have a huge surge of Islamophobia. All these are this kind of us versus them. And I think that the politicians who are making political, taking political advantage of this kind of splitting, exactly are preying on the fact that that we don't have a counter narrative in which we do talk about these kind of disparities in a functional way. Thank you so much. So now we are going to whom? To what? To
Cheryl.
Sharon? Okay, we'll start with Cheryl Friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much. last time I went last, so now I'll get to see how it feels to go second. Thank you. So I want to thank Dean Holmes and Director Danielle Officer and the Diversity Committee for asking me to participate on this panel, and especially with my John Jay colleagues. Whenever I'm with any one of these colleagues, I always end up learning so much, so I feel really honored to be here. And I want to have a little bit of a different spin on the topic today. I want to talk about the skills and strategies for engaging in challenging dialogue. So what are those skills and strategies? And since I've been engaging in these dialogues the entire semester in my Education and Justice course, I'd like to acknowledge my class, who's here today. Yay. We've been engaging in these challenging dialogues. They have inspired me, and they challenged me in so many ways this semester, and I really thank them. So I want to make 6 important points on engaging in challenging dialogues. One, and as my class would tell you, these conversations can only be authentic if we acknowledge that they are rooted in a historical, structural, and systemic analysis of oppression and dominance in this country. And if we look at other countries, we would probably find something similar. As both Obama and Faulkner said, the past is not past. It is with us today. It shapes the current social, economic, political, cultural, racial state of affairs. It is with us whenever we're engaged in these conversations. 2, nothing has prepared us to have these dialogues on race, sexual orientation, religion, etc. in mixed company. We have them in same company, but not in mixed company. In fact, given this historical legacy, we've been encouraged not to. If nothing has prepared us, why should we expect that we should just know how? Would you go to an untrained surgeon? We dishonor them by thinking we should just know how. We value and honor these challenging dialogues when we acknowledge that it takes a body of knowledge and skills. It's something we can learn over time. It's a body of knowledge and skill. We can increase our capacity and get much better at having them. The third point I like to make is to say something about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and take risks. We're talking about dimensions of race, skin color, this is not an exhaustive list. Religion, sexual orientation, sex, gender, right? But when it comes to engaging in challenging dialogues, perhaps Harlan Dalton said it best in his book. It's a little book called Racial Healing. We have run away from race for far too long. We are so afraid of inflaming the wound that we fail to deal with what remains America's central social problem. We will never achieve racial healing if we do not confront each other, take risks, make ourselves vulnerable, put pride aside, say all the things we're not supposed to say in mixed company. In short, put on the table all of our fears, trepidations, wishes, and hopes. This leads me to the fourth point. It's complicated. So it does take a body of knowledge and skill and risk-taking, allowing ourselves, right? But what happens when we attempt to take those risks, put our fears and anxieties on the table? We end up, at times, unintentionally saying hurtful things. So now I want to stop for a minute and say a word about hateful versus hurtful dialogues. I'm talking about hurtful today, right? Not hateful, but hurtful things. And it's important that we distinguish between the two, as we already have done in today's presentation. So for our purpose today, this is about hurtful speech that might emerge when we're engaging in challenging dialogues. If one has hate in their heart, we need to think about that as a mental health issue, a spiritual issue, and address it as such. One of the mind and soul. Hateful speech, hate is as harmful to you as it is harmful to others. Many famous people have spoken on this topic. Mandela taught us that hate is crippling and it has no place in this world. Booker T. Washington said, "I will permit no man to narrow and degrade my soul by making me hate him." The price of hating another human being is loving oneself less. Eldridge Cleaver in Soul on Ice, right before he was asked to leave the United States. So I'm talking not about hate speech. which needs to be addressed, as I said, a mental health or spiritual issue, or an issue of racial superiority or supremacy. And we've heard a lot about this hate speech this week. It's also been labeled dangerous, paranoid, racist, and fascist, right? But for now, I'm talking again about, not about hateful, but hurtful. So what if we take those risks and you hurt someone? It's complicated. Like the nature of oppression and dominance, where they originate is complicated, and it has to be with us when we're having these conversations. The work around engaging in challenging dialogues is always about increasing our capacity to tolerate the ambiguity so we can hold the complexity of this work. We need to increase our capacity to hold both. The reality that we want to try to engage and the reality that we might unintentionally hurt someone. So here we need two concepts. One comes from the work of Daryl Wing Su, Robert Carter, and our own Kevin Nadal, the concept of microaggressions. Those brief, commonplace, unintentional, and often daily verbal indignities that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults towards people of color or towards one's gender, sex, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, giving messages like, you don't belong, you can't be trusted, you are not normal, you are all the same. It might happen in a classroom where you are the only person from your race or religion or ethnicity, or you're asked to represent your entire group. And my students have talked about this. We've had these conversations about this exact point in our classroom. Now, add to microaggressions what we know about historical trauma. Again, the work of Karina Walters and the work of Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart. And Karina really was the first to intersect the two, microaggressions and historical trauma. Microaggressions happen and they're hurtful, but they can also trigger past trauma. We now know that historical events and contexts affect present-day health, mental health, and stress coping capacity. For example, events that target a community like the forced relocation of Native Americans causes catastrophic upheaval and can have pernicious effects that persist across generations, from biological to behavioral. The past is not past. The past is not past. Engaging in challenging dialogues needs to be considered a sacred thing. We must take risks and yet be mindful about our interactions and our intentions as well as our impact. One critical strategy that we've actually used in the classroom that's been helpful for me is the idea of intent and impact, holding both. Often our intent is not to hurt. We're trying to have a challenging dialogue, but also we must think about the impact, holding both. So again, this work is about increasing our capacity to do so, right? So here it is. You need to hold both, intent and impact. Our intent is rarely to hurt, but our impact can. Be ready to listen, to unpackage this, to think through it, increasing our capacity for true authenticity, holding both, holding it all. To close, a quote about diversity that we've discussed in our class by William Chase in the book, The Language of Action. Diversity, generally understood and embraced, is not casual liberal tolerance of anything and everything not yourself. It is not polite accommodation. Instead, diversity is, in action, the sometimes painful awareness that other people, other races, other voices, other habits of mind have as much integrity as being, as much claim on the world as you do. We are meant to be here together. We are meant to be here together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cheryl. We'll go to Sylvia Montalban, the Chief Diversity Officer of the college.
Hi, thank you. I'm here to just give you some of the nuts and bolts of how the college attempts to protect differing views and the expression of them, but to do so in an orderly environment, and what our obligations are as a public institution, just to have that as a foundation so that you're aware. So, as some of you may know, I monitor compliance with the CUNY non-discrimination policies. And that entails that these policies serve to foster inclusiveness and to protect people against mistreatment for certain differences in protected statuses, such as race, religion, ethnicity, gender, disability, etc. And as a public institution, we're expected to balance the obligation to protect against non-discrimination, which is required by federal laws, including Title VII and Title IX, while not impeding the free expression of ideas that not everyone agrees with. So John Jay College values diversity in its many forms. I really hope you know that. And as a public institution under CUNY, we are an arm of New York State. And the college complies with First Amendment in protecting the freedom of speech. Valuing diversity includes allowing a free exchange of ideas and opinions, some of which may differ from what any particular individual may believe or agree with. And while we're discussing today how important it is for this free exchange of ideas and the discussion on any topics or issues that affect the college community, as well as topics of global importance, we also are discussing the high value the college places on exchanging the ideas with respect. So in a way that minimizes or avoids anger or confrontation. So that value applies to the context of one-on-one discussions, as well as the ability to assemble on campus to openly express concerns. So while the First Amendment protects expressions that may seem vile to some individuals, we are here to encourage the respectful exchange of those differing views that may sometimes seem offensive to some groups, but not others. So protecting the diversity we have in the college means that there are standards for protecting respectful exchange. And the college promotes that in order so that we are able to share in this environment and its facilities. So let me just give you some background, a little bit of legal background. So the Supreme Court has recognized some difference between a public college campus and other public forums that are deemed more traditional, such as public parks and streets where expressive activities receive more First Amendment protection. So I want you to understand that the college is concerned about disruptions or threats to public safety, but not on regulating the content of speech. And that includes avoiding the destruction of property or inciting violence. So the college can apply reasonable regulations, restrictions upon the use of the campus that are consistent with its and CUNY's educational mission, provided the regulations are applied in a content-neutral way. That means the college can when, where, and how the speech occurs, but the regulation or restriction cannot be designed to limit the speech on the basis of the content of the message. So in practice, these reasonable restrictions would be applied as to time, place, and manner and must fulfill a significant legitimate institutional purpose. And other avenues would be available for communicating the same message to the same intended audience. So for example, the college could prohibit the use of a bullhorn if the speech would generate noise that would interfere with communications during a class session held at the same time. Notices can be prohibited from being posted in a classroom doors, but there are designated areas for posting notices. The time a speech would be delivered may be regulated so that it does not interfere with teaching activities or course registration times. All activities that fall under the educational mission of the university, for example. So if an event gathering is blocking entrances or exits, it can be moved so that the safety is not impeded. Those are examples of how a college can regulate the when, where, and how. Now, there are exceptions, and you may have heard of this, where fighting words are deemed words that are hate speech, and per se they are words that actually can incite violence. Now, they would be language that generally is expressed to incite hatred or violence from their target, and it is directed at a person, at a one-on-one confrontation possibly, to excite them into reacting with violence. Those are case-by-case analyses, but there are times when those situations can be stopped and impeded by the college. Those are examples of fighting words. Now, words are different than actions, and if you get in a person's face or touch someone, then you are actually threatening physical harm, and that can be controlled or stopped. So again, it's not really about the content, but the conduct, threatening conduct. In addition, other types of exceptions or behavior that can be regulated is true threats of illegal conduct or incitement intended to likely produce imminent or illegal conduct. So again, it is about making an immediate threat to get an immediate reaction to engage in illegal behavior, etc. But it's not necessarily discussing situations that can incite people to behave that way in the future. That is not necessarily something that can be prohibited from people expressing. So I just want you to understand that the college is really just concerned about limiting situations that can rile people up immediately or threaten someone directly to react and create a situation of violence. Again, the content is what we are trying to protect, but the expression of it in a respectful manner is really what we're trying to emphasize here today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sylvia. We will go now to Dolores Jones-Brown from the Center on Race, Crime, and Justice.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. And I want to thank the Vice President and Dean for inviting me to be involved with this discussion for a second time. I really appreciate all the comments that have come from my colleagues here at the table. And while some of the discussion has been sort of high level and abstract, I want to transition into sort of some of the concrete ways in which hateful and hurtful speech can be addressed in ways that are not hateful or hurtful, hopefully, right? So I actually want to call my little bit of minutes talking, resisting the urge to become hateful while continuing to resist oppression. And since my area is race, I would say while continuing to resist racial oppression. Fortuitously, Justice Antonin Scalia made some statements yesterday in the United States Supreme Court that are very useful to sort of have this discussion today. So in an article titled "Affirmative Action Sends Blacks to Schools to Advance for Them," the Supreme Court Justice, and says in oral arguments, and this is taken directly from an article, so in oral arguments Wednesday for a Supreme Court affirmative action case, Justice Antonin Scalia, a well-known critic of affirmative action, suggested that the policy was hurting minority students by sending them to schools too academically challenging for them. Referencing an unidentified amicus brief, Scalia said that there were people who would contend that, and this is direct quote, it does not benefit African Americans to get them into the University of Texas where they do not do well, as opposed to having them go to a less advanced school, a slower track school where they do well. He argued that most of the black scientists in this country, and this is also a direct quote, don't come from schools like the University of Texas. And another quote, they come from lesser schools where they do not feel that they are being pushed ahead in classes that are too fast for them, Scalia said. The case, Fisher versus University of Texas, Austin, is being brought by a white woman who was not accepted by the university and who says its policy to use race as a factor in a pool of the students that are accepted is unconstitutional. Now, the case is unique in that the University of Texas accepts 3/4 of its students in a race-blind program. So full 3/4 of students are accepted in a race-blind program, which actually was designed to increase diversity, and that automatically accepts Texas high school students who are in the top 10% of their class. The other quarter of students are accepted through a qualitative, holistic review that includes race, along with a number of other personal and academic factors. The litigant, the challenger, Abigail Fisher, was not in the top 10% of her high school class, and thus is challenging the holistic review program. Now, my question is, how should we respond to Justice Scalia's comments? A sort of hateful, hurtful combination response would be to call him a racist asshole. but words have power, and education should empower us to be able to address the clear hurt and possible hate in Justice Scalia's comments by saying things like, he is a narrow-minded and thoughtless person, okay? And we would ask, well, what about President Obama and countless others who have gone to advanced schools and seem to have done pretty well for themselves, and they also happen to be black? And what about white students who fail out of such schools or underperform at such schools? These are the kind of questions that we could pose to those who might be inclined to agree with the statements that Justice Scalia made. Now, we could also critique his statement. What might really be affecting black student performance at predominantly white institutions? Feelings of alienation, differential treatment by faculty or students, having to balance the need to work while also attending school, something that perhaps some of their counterparts are not having to do because they come from more affluent or economically advantaged families. The other critique is, what is the evidence that he is using to support his statements? Or is this a claim that he is making, or the authors of the amicus brief are making, without any evidential basis? And even then, if there is some set of statistics they can point to, what does that mean for principles such as individuality, personal talents that are pretty well distributed across people of all natures? Now, do his statements amount to impermissible racial discrimination? And that I'm so thankful for Sylvia for talking about the law. And should these statements lead to calls for his impeachment? Hashtag impeach Justice Scalia. Okay? Can you identify the civil and human rights principles that make his statements offensive? So that's a question I want to throw out to the audience, and we can talk about that during Q&A, right? So are there civil and human rights principles that make his statements offensive? Can you identify the conservative principles that make his statement offensive? And what does his willingness to say this from the United States Supreme Court bench say about the current racial climate of this country? And then the question would be, how can we continue to push back against such a climate in a principled and measured way? So I want to end with a few tools that I'd like to suggest for continuing to push back against a climate which seems to be decidedly more divisive along racial and other lines. The very first thing is to be courageous. As our moderator pointed out, we have not for a very long time talked candidly about the historical context of race in the United States and the ways in which it has privileged some people and disadvantaged others, and continues to do so. To talk courageously about such issues today means that some people will be attacked, they may not get a job, they may not be invited to social events, they may not be invited back to academic events, but the need to be courageous is still there. When we have these discussions, we need to focus on the principles or the overarching issues and not let them degenerate into the picayune or personal attacks. When reaching an impasse, and this will sometimes happen, we won't always agree on the substance of issues, the principles, or what final outcomes should be. And so I've coined the term, others have used it, we must be able to say, we agree to disagree. We need to continue to work towards a society that recognizes our common humanity. So the statement about standardized testing that has been created by mostly white people means that it will in fact be testing the things that mostly white people experience. And because of the racialized history of this country, people's experiences are very, very different. We are, however, interdependent in ways that sometimes we're not willing to accept. And some people who have more money have used that money to sort of isolate themselves from people who have less money. The issue of gentrification in the city of New York right now is very real. So why is it that the poor people must move out of the neighborhood in order for the more wealthy to move in? I want to repeat again, we must be courageous. We need to talk to people of different backgrounds from our own. I do it all the time, and I learn so much interesting information from talking to people from different backgrounds. Right now, we have a presidential candidate who is saying very hurtful and hateful things about immigration. I went to give a talk in the Berkshires a few weeks ago, and I stayed with families who had wonderful stories of immigration that they shared with me in a way that was very prideful. One of them were immigrants from Russia, the others were immigrants from Ireland, and there wasn't the kind of animus about the immigration experience that presidential candidate Trump is expressing. We have to attempt to understand and empathize with those other people's experiences, even if we don't agree with some of the things that they say, or our attempt to understand and empathize does not mean that we have to agree with their positions. If possible, we need to attempt to provide accurate information in an effort to shift their thinking if their thinking is based on falsehoods, myths, and stereotypes. And then finally, I want to say we have to learn to use more ands than ors. I am wearing my Black Lives Matter pin today, and when I gave my talk at the Berkshires, I had two young ladies come up to me and say, well, we don't understand why the discussion about Black Lives Matter, what does that mean about Muslim lives mattering and about Latino lives mattering? And we are not sure how to talk about that. I said, one of the things you want to say is that it's not an or. It's not that Black lives matter or white lives matter or Muslims or Latino lives matter. Just say to your friends or whoever you're having this discussion with is that Black lives matter and Muslim lives matter and Latino lives matter and all lives matter. And if we can manage to have that discussion in a meaningful way, I think we can get past a lot of the hate and the hurt. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dolores, for this very inspirational talk. We will now go to our last speaker, Professor Jama Adams.
Thank you. The question I want us to think about is to bring it a bit closer to home, and that is, does the institution protect and challenge? Something like 19% of John Jay students graduate in 4 years. The average graduation rate, the average graduating GPA is 2.9, which is a C+, and we hear there's grade inflation. And something like 40% of the students who graduate from John Jay see no discernible change in the amount of money they earn. Okay? So the point I'm making here is that the institution can do hurtful things. And when you feel that so many of the institutions are doing hurtful things, the police, the healthcare system, the educational system, it doesn't take much imagination to see how some people can start hating, because they're feeling they have been dehumanized, they no longer exist. And while they may live lives of quiet desperation, they will find the demagogues, they will find those who are promoting hate attractive, because those people will speak to their pain. They won't speak to their pain in the way that we're saying here, let us examine it, let us try and understand it. They will just stoke a rage that's part of being human. And part of being human is meaning being in a community where there is a social contract. The social contract says, I will keep you safe. I will allow you to develop yourself reasonably. In exchange, you must constrain yourself. And what we're seeing happening is the contract has shifted. You will constrain yourself. You will behave. But I don't have much resources to give to you. that kind of attitude promotes rage. Almost 50% of New Yorkers that's in the 5 boroughs live at or below the poverty level. They're walking around, they're in the school, they're on the sidewalks, they're invisible. If you walk down 58th Street late in the evenings when they put out the garbage, you will see people going through the garbage to collect the bottles, the cans, to recycle. And the building that garbage is coming out of, I think the cheapest rent in there is something like $3,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment. And to show you the sort of divisions we're living with in our country and the indifference that feeds hate and hurt, is a sense that a lot of people who live in that building exit through that back entrance. And you'd think, well, could you sort your garbage? Could the building organize a committee that says, okay, we know these people are going to come for this. Can we put them all in one place so they could just come and get it? They're invisible. We don't see them. So when institutions act like that, they're very quietly feeding the rage. The professors at John Jay who have no tolerance, even in first-year students, for what they're calling plagiarism. And I've found that my students, I teach a lot of first-year students, they don't know what you're talking about. Because one of them said to me, how could this be my idea? It has to come from somewhere. It's like, So, but they get hammered. They get hammered, and there is no space. And all of those things feed hate. Because as the other speakers are saying, there's no space to dialogue. And let's sit down and understand, what were you thinking? What did you feel when you did this? That space is gone. Okay? So, yes, there's ISIS, and yes, there's Donald Trump. But my larger concern, it's right here at John Jay. It happens every single day. It happens in our classrooms. It happens in our cafeteria. Last year, I was speaking to a maintenance lady, one of the people who cleans my floor. And she was explaining to me that there was a point a year, 18 months ago, where apparently there was a shortage of maintenance people. So they had to double up. And she was told, not asked, she was told that when she finished her 3 to 8, the shift that ended at 4, she had to do another shift of mandatory overtime and then go home and be back in school by 7 o'clock the next morning. She said 2 problems with that. 1, by the time I get home, it's time for me to almost turn around and come back. And 2, the trains are not safe at that hour of the night for me. So she had to find a secret place to sleep in the school, because had they found her, she'd have been violating. Okay? That hurts. And that's how institutions oftentimes, they don't think through, how does this impact? Now, there are people at John Jay who do good work around that. So the issue was brought up to show you how we are also capable of doing good things. The issue was brought up of how do we make sure that students who come in the evenings have access to counselors and academic advisement and financial aid. And what they did, they sat down, the various offices, and they surveyed the students and says, well, what day, when do you want to come? And we're able to come up with a template. It's not perfect, but it catches more students. And you see a discerning mind at work that you say, now, how can we engage them? So it's possible. But what we're seeing happening out there is that there's a retreat by public institutions of the need to advocate for our humanity. We seem to be getting more and more into contractual arrangements with contracts that we did not negotiate. Anybody's bought anything now sees there's this long contract and you must click. And you can't challenge a contract, otherwise you can't get the product. You hope that someone else will challenge the contract. And what we're seeing increasingly is that the people who are challenging the contracts, these hurtful contracts, are not the government. It's public organizations, it's Amnesty, it's watchdog groups. And that to me pushes our society apart because it makes it much more adversarial. So we've got to be careful about this idea that the government and the corporations protect us. I'm questioning that more and more. I'm listening to Sylvia, And what I'm hearing the law saying is behave. You know, say very nicely, well, you know, I don't really like you, what you did to me with that contract. You know, that was so hurtful. You know? But if I get up and say, you know, motherfucker, I'm going to blow your head off at that, oh dear, you cannot do that. But the rage is building, and when I say to you, you know, I don't really like that contract, you said, have your lawyer talk to my lawyer. I don't have a lawyer. So I sit there with the rage, and then the demagogue comes along, and I am just ripe for the picking. Because whenever I went with my little 25 cents brain to get justice, I was told, well, you're not really told. You're told press 1 or go to a website because you can't speak to anyone. But when the demagogues get up, when ISIS get up, they speak to you. They understand your pain and they say, come. Except that the bill they give is so costly. They take your life, they take your soul. So you try to escape from one form of exploitation and you walk straight into another. And the question is, who out there cares for us? Who really cares for us? And it seems increasingly not many people. So 4 suggestions. John Jay needs to create more safe places where hurt and hate can be acknowledged. Okay? We don't have those spaces where we can sit and talk, and we have to make some kind of a moral judgment about our hierarchy. So we find that today we're competing with Homecoming Queen. How did that happen? But one of the hardest things to do at John Jay is to have a community where we can sit down and says, here are the events we want to do this semester. We have to make sure that if we're going to talk about bridging the divide with the police, if we're going to talk about Homecoming Queen, you cannot set them up on the same time. There has to be place. Part of being safe means I can chill, I can wear my, you know, short skirt, or my pants can be falling off, and there's a space and a time for that. But when we set them up in conflict, deeper institutional forces are at work that are saying, we really don't want to have this hurtful, painful discussion, so let's have some jump up in the air and shake up yourself, and it doesn't happen. The second thing we have to fight against is budgetary silencing. To have these discussions, you need smart, thoughtful people in the room who were once 19 but are no longer 19 or 20. 19 and 20-year-olds come with a certain passion, which is loving. It can be narrow, it can be misguided, but they're 19 and that's fine. We're the adults. Well, gee, we haven't hired full-time faculty for the last 3 years. Most of the classes are taught by part-time faculty who are running all over the city trying to earn a living wage. So when you have that kind of budgetary violence, it means you've just silenced the voices who can say, let us sit down, let's break bread, let's talk. They're not here. And then the forces that are angry and rageful, they're very much here whispering, you know, those goddamn Jews, you know, those goddamn Muslims. And there's nobody to counteract that because we're too busy. The course load is too expensive. We're counseling too many students. We have our own publications. And what you find is, oh, you know, Jama, I really like that you work with the students, but you haven't published anything, so I'm not going to give you tenure. Okay? So we don't need to look at the people out there who are making noise. We need to look at ourselves. Last 2 points. Each of us needs to really pay attention to how we spend our money. Because at the end of the day, in this country, money talks. So why are we spending our money with corporations who don't like us, who don't show people of color in their ads, who give money to those who wants to deport everybody who didn't come from England and certain parts of Ireland? It's not all parts of Ireland they like, okay? We need to really pay attention to what power do I have as a small person to make a difference, okay? And finally, we must be informed. We have to read more, we have to talk to smart people, we have to be reflective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jama. So I think that we have heard a really remarkable array of both definition and elucidation of the issues and discerning between hateful, hurtful on both the institutional, the moral, definitely the procedural, the instrumental levels. And notwithstanding some very poignant calls for a revolution. I'll open the floor to questions from the crowd, considering that we have only 4 minutes. And perhaps it is yet another example to what Jama was talking about. The institutional, we call it in psychology, diffusion of responsibility. Everybody can be very well-meaning, but the system is built such that everybody is doing very tiny part that is not directly related to the oppression, but the institution or the system as a whole on a cultural level, institutional level, organizational level, and as we have seen also in the class level or our own level, is oppressive and potentially depriving. So with that being said, with apologies, who wants to ask any questions? Or make a comment.
Do I need to be in the mic or can I stand?
No, you have to use the mic because we're recording forever and ever.
Oh, okay. No pressure. Hi, my name is Mark. I'm a new staff person here at John Jay, and I work for Student Affairs. I guess my comment, Professor Adams, I really liked your comment about John Jay needing to create spaces for hate and hurt. We aspire to create safer spaces on this campus through our safe zone trainings and through our various diversity trainings and programs. But really, how can we create spaces where in a building, a literal building, that seems to be so tight for space? I think that we're all really on top of each other physically. There's very little space in this building. How do we create the space without actually having the physical space to really invest both financially and logistically in creating spaces that combat the oppression?
The VP just walked in. Beautiful timing, okay? It's a very challenging question because of the central dilemma I think any public institution faces, and this is the dilemma, that many of our citizens, and I'm not just talking about black folks, white folks, Muslims, you name the community, are often coming to us with a lot of pain. They have been hurt. I have a friend who lives in Iowa. Iowa is one of the whitest states in the union. And when he tells you about the substance abuse, the abandonment of the elderly, the isolation, it's really, it hurts. And this is Professor Jones' point. So you can say blacks and people in Iowa, white people in Iowa. It's not or. So they come to an institution and they reasonably buy into the attitude that if I come to John Jay, I go to Yale, you know what? I'll get an education and I can break out of this place. And they come to us, and some of us, and I'm one of them, says, well, my job is not to make this place too safe for you in the context of there is no pain here. There is going to be pain. I'm going to confront you in a respectful way with painful things. Some of them don't want to hear that. You have people who go to the women's center, they have no interest in hearing about men. You have gay people, they have no interest in hearing about hetero or anybody else on the spectrum. So, and part of that comes from their own subjectivity. If you know the pain I went through as a gay person, if you know the pain I went through as a black person, I am not interested in hearing the privilege that blah, 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 blah. And because we are paid and we are professionals, we have to figure out how do you create a space which maybe it has to be some kind of a scaffolded space where in one space, listen, you know, all you can do here is speak. We're not going to respond, we're not going to chat, but there has to be places where those arguments get challenged. And that to me is the big challenge we face, not just at John Jay, but you cannot come to a college for 4 years and say, I want to be safe, in the way that some people use it. I don't want to hear any, that's not going to work. And so to answer your question, the issue is not for me finding a room. We can find room at John Jay's, okay? At 1:30 to 3:30, most of the rooms are empty. All I need is some chairs, but others will speak to this. How you create that cycle, that holding space where I hear you, and now can you hear this, and how we get them to hear this and how we facilitate that is really the big question.
Thank you.
I just would like to add to that. I think that we have a natural, space is power, and then, how do you create, I think what you're saying so much about, how do you create that, that safety, right? We're not saying that it won't be uncomfortable, so we will increase the capacity for the discomfort, but make sure that it's safe, but also discuss what does safety mean and how is that different across race, right? But we have a natural place, we have the classroom. But it means an organization needs to really invest a lot in working with faculty and how do you, what are those skills and strategies that I spoke about to facilitate challenging dialogues? And again, it's a body of knowledge and skill. It's group work, it's conflict resolution, it's constantly increasing consciousness, right? And it is that historical systemic analysis. We can't do it without that analysis, but the classroom is the perfect place to support the idea of sacred, safe conversations. I was recently working with Columbia Public Health faculty. I said, when you put the race demographics on the board, do you understand that just seeing those race demographics has a differential impact on every single person in the room? They said, no, we never thought about that. Just seeing the race demographics, it has a differential impact. That awareness, you have to start with that awareness, right? And then I think what I love about this panel is I think that we have constructed like what it takes and all the issues from the history to as you were saying, the procedural. So wonderful question, wonderful question.
I just want to make one other point. Also, apart from all of the logistical challenges and spacing challenges that we've talked about here in creating a space, we're striving to at least create collaborations and cross-collaborations in the college to bring forth issues of concern for people. So, for example, the fact that we have this panel together is really derived from our efforts in the our Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. So we have a community conversation series, and some people on this panel, Cheryl and Dolores including, we're all members of that committee, which is comprised of faculty and staff and a lot of student leaders. So it's also approaching all of those people and raising those issues so that members of our committee can address them and then figure out creative ways to bring them out into the public forum, such as this. So that's another way of creating a space. It's finding creative ways to meet and discuss and address.
I just want to also add that I agree that the college is a very, very good place to start. It is good to start with awareness, which is where we are. It is good to start with education. It's also good to start with research and knowing research. So for example, I'm listening to what you quoted for Justice Scalia, and I'm thinking, this is not commensurate with what we know in psychology. So what psychology have looked at in terms of cognitive potential, for example, is indeed that IQ tests were written by white people for white people, and it is not even white, it is very rarefied type of set of, and also set of assumptions. The good news is that the definition of success in this country is changing. And it is no longer entirely in the hands of the hegemony. We have celebrity, we have YouTube, we have the internet accessibility. Also, schools that are in the forefront of the education have changed their criteria from merely cognitive, how much do you know how to, what is the next in a series, which is not helpful to many people. They are looking at other things. For example, tenacity and passion and leadership and things that are not within what Scalia is talking about, things that could be very much being contextualized within. And another thing is that, and that's not a plug for my research, but it is encouraging us to think about the other side. one of the problems that we have, and if you notice, even when you cited Justice Scalia, did you notice how magnanimous he thinks he is? He's really doing it for the benefit of it. That's right. Black needs different. And that magnanimity is just as dangerous. When people think that they are doing the right thing, this is just as dangerous and just as colluding. And it is helping us gloss over. And what is left is what Jama is talking about, those enclaves in which the hate makes perfect sense. And we don't have a counter-narrative. So the a college environment is exactly that. And one of the things that we can do, both with research and with schoolwork, is to raise the awareness and become activists in exactly undermining or deconstructing the statistical or the research. After all, when we are looking at correlations, we can find a whole lot of things that can help us oppress. And the context is most important, and that's what we can give.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. It was a pleasure.
I think we have one more. We have one more question.
We had another question?
We
We're
are
out of time.
so
Out of time, right.
Sorry.
So,
I didn't even mention that we can find virtual spaces, not only physical spaces. I forgot that.
but I'd like to know your question.
Yes, we would like to know your question.
Sure.
Even if
go
the
ask
camera's
Why
off,
not?
we'd
Ask
like to
her.
know your question.
Yeah.
No,
Yes.
go to the
Yeah.
thing, because
Are
we
we
want it
still
to be,
on?
we want
Do
you to
we
be recorded.
recording time too? Oh, good.
Good.
Really?
Edit it later so we don't look like we don't know what we're doing.
It was live stream.
Oh, it is. Sorry.
Oops.
Director's cut.
Hello, my name is Jim Wells. I'm a student from Professor Cheryl Frank's class that focuses on unification. I have come to believe that freedom of speech is becoming a problem now. People like Donald Trump are using it in such a way that they can express whatever they want on topics that are currently hot among us. And then, how do I say this? People, once they hear a belief enough, they start to believe it. Maybe it's not true when they don't have any evidence for it, but they just subconsciously, it happens. My question to you is, how can we counter this, since freedom of speech is, well, it's in the Constitution. We can't take it away.
End of story.
I would just want to say that one of the wonderful ways of doing some countering is the use of social media, because I think there is a problem with who owns the mass broadcast systems. And at once upon a time, Al Sharpton was working towards deconstructing or removing the monopoly that some people have on the mass media. And then that effort sort of seemed to fall by the wayside. And so probably as the lawyers, we should probably try to come up with some kind of legal way of putting more broadcast facilities into the hands of people who think counter to Donald Trump. And then those folks will have a venue to show the counter narrative, because I disagree a little bit with our moderator that there isn't a counter narrative. I think there is, but it just doesn't get enough airtime.
I agree with my colleague, but everybody has one of these things. One of the shifts in the whole question of policing has been because of this communication device. And it is troubling when the police are going to get up and say it's making their job more difficult. So I'm like, what is their job? But that's the point, that simply putting alternative narratives out there then provokes certain kinds of questions. But those questions will only be asked if we put them out there. Okay, so all for freedom of speech, but it means that other voices have to be heard. And especially young people can be very creative about the kind of messages. I heard about 6-second messages. I mean, I can't even gather my thoughts in 6 seconds, but I've seen a couple of these things. They are powerful. Get your messages out there. Do not allow them to abuse this precious freedom of speech by being silent. Okay?
Thank you again.
And thank you.